Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor. I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador. I'd like to share with you my Alpha 7R4 camera settings. Now you can download these from my website. Just go to markgaylor.com and look for the download section. Now if you're wanting to load my settings, you're going to have to put them onto a memory card. Now the folder that you'll download is called the setting folder. Once you've put your memory card into your computer, you're going to be looking for the Sony folder, which lives inside of the private folder. Now you need to copy my setting folder inside of your Sony folder. If you already have a setting folder there, you're going to need to replace that. Once you've done that, you're going to bring your memory card over to your camera and put it in the top slot, slot 1. Now on the shoot mode dial, make sure you're not in 1, 2 or 3 on the shoot mode dial. You need to be in, say, program or aperture priority in order to be able to save and load the settings. Press your menu button on the back of the camera and then come up over to setup 7 and then hit save load settings and then choose load. Now if you're going to load my settings, you may want to back up your own camera configuration first by saving your settings to a separate card. I'm loading this CamSet 01 now, so I'll just press the center button and now you'll need to select OK in order to overwrite your settings with my settings. And once that is done, your camera will be set up the same as my camera, and that includes things like the custom buttons and also the function menu. And so you'll find that you'll have subject detection in your function menu, because one of the things that I like to do when I'm changing between human IAF and animal IAF is just hit the FN key, just roll the front dial one click, and then that will select the animal IAF. And now I can start shooting with shallow depth of field animals, ensuring that the eye of the animal is pin sharp. And now I need to go back to humans, just press the FN key again, just roll that front dial and go back to humans. Now one of the things that your camera isn't set up the same as mine at the moment are my PAL settings, my portrait, action and landscape settings, and those are accessed via the shoot mode dial. Now they're on the card, they're in the setting folder that you've just put into slot 1, so we're going to need to go over to the menu and we're going to roll that front dial a couple of clicks to the right in order to choose the camera setup. Now using the rear dial, I'm going to come over to page 4. Now make sure that you've got select media set to slot 1, and then make sure the shoot mode dial is either set to 1, 2 or 3. I'll just move my shoot mode dial to 1. Okay, just sort of a half press of that shutter release to come back out of there. We're going to go back into the menus now, and what we're going to do is come back to page 3 and we're going to come over to the recall. This will be grayed out if you don't have 1, 2 or 3 selected on that shoot mode dial. Now press the center button to recall one of my settings. You're going to need to come over to M1 to pick up my portrait settings. Press the center button to enter those, and then come back to the menu, come down one memory item to memory, and then transfer them over to number 1 on your shoot mode dial. Now you have the portrait settings that I use, and that will register those. Now we would need to repeat the process for number 2 and 3. Recall, go over to M2, select, and then menu again, come down one, and then enter those into number 2 on your camera. And just to complete the process, we'll press the recall one more time, come over to number 3, which are my handheld landscape settings, menu button, come down to memory and enter those on 3. Okay, now I pretty much shoot 95% of whatever I shoot using my PAL settings as my starting point. Now number 1, let's just dial on the shoot mode dial away from number 1 and then back to number 1, so you can see that this is now set on your camera. Now when I say portrait, I'm looking for figure ground separation, so I'm choosing wide apertures. Now if you're choosing a group setting, you can start with the portrait, but if you've got 3 or 4 people, you may want to choose a smaller aperture, maybe f8 or f11, in order to get everybody sharp. Now we go over to my action settings. Okay, now this is typically using a wide aperture with drive set to high and a very fast shutter speed. Now you can control the shutter speed via the ISO auto minimum shutter speed, which I programmed to C1. So if you don't need something quite as fast, or you're wanting to create some background blur when panning, you can drop that down to something like ISO 250 or even slower to create some motion blur while you're panning your subject. You may also need to close the aperture down in order to be able to create that slower shutter speed, but don't exceed or don't go smaller than f11, otherwise you'll lose your phase detect autofocus. Now I'm coming to my landscape settings, so I'm dialing in number 3 on the shoot mode dial. We start at f11. You'll see the spot focus is lower in the frame because I'm typically focusing on something a couple of meters away from the camera when I'm using my ultra wide angle lens. You may need to reposition this using your multi-selector or joystick so you're getting your best depth of field from this f11 setting. Now if you're going to put the camera on a tripod, because these are my handheld settings, you just want to press the right side of that control wheel on the back of the camera so you can change out of ISO auto onto 100 ISO. Now you could also press the left side of the control wheel, so you could access maybe a 2-second delay if you're doing some long exposures, and so that you're not going to put any vibration into the camera by pressing the shutter release. You're giving the time for the camera basically to steady out after pressing the shutter release. Okay, so now you have my portrait, action and landscape. Just remember, I've got a movie for each of the portrait, action and landscape to show you what I've actually configured and why I've configured it to these groups of settings. And I've also got a movie called Memory Mastermind, which shows how I work with 1, 2 or 3, but may use minor modifications to those settings in order to get the optimum quality for the genre that I'm shooting. Okay, I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador.